A billionaire's voice echoed through the grand ballroom and silenced more than 300 guests. "Tonight, my daughter will choose her future husband." Crystal chandeliers shimmered above tables dressed in white linen. A string quartet played softly beneath the hum of conversation. Every man in the room seemed to sit a little straighter. Some were CEOs. Some were investors. Some had family names printed on skyscrapers across America. Richard Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Global, stood at the center of it all with the confidence of a man who had spent 40 years turning ambition into billions. Beside him stood his daughter, Charlotte Whitmore. Elegant, composed, and impossible to ignore, she smiled politely as cameras flashed from every corner of the ballroom. "You know the agreement," Richard said. "You've met every candidate. You've had a year to decide. Tonight you make your choice." A ripple of excitement spread through the crowd. Several mothers exchanged hopeful glances. Young executives adjusted expensive cufflinks. One man quietly straightened his designer tie. Everyone believed they already understood how this story would end. Charlotte slowly lifted her eyes and scanned the room. She looked at the men seated near the stage. She looked at the politicians, entrepreneurs, and heirs. Then she looked past all of them. Her gaze settled on someone standing near the rear entrance. Someone no one else had bothered to notice. "I've already made my decision," she said. The room grew still. Richard smiled. "Then tell us." Charlotte took a slow breath. "The man I choose is Ethan Carter." Silence. Then confusion. Heads turned. People whispered. Several guests searched the room, trying to remember which millionaire carried that name. Near the back of the ballroom, a man froze beside a refreshment table. Ethan Carter wore a simple navy button-down shirt. No luxury watch. No custom suit. Just clean clothes and tired eyes. In one arm, he held the hand of a little girl no older than 9. "Dad," the girl whispered, looking up at him. "I think she means you." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "That can't be right." But Charlotte was already walking toward him. The click of her heels echoed across the marble floor. Guests stared as she passed rows of wealthy men who had expected to hear their names. Richard's smile disappeared. "Charlotte," he said carefully, "this is not the time for jokes." "I'm not joking." The words landed softly, but they carried through the room. Ethan shifted uneasily as dozens of eyes settled on him. He had only attended because a contractor friend had given him an extra invitation after a charity renovation project. He never expected to speak to anyone important. He certainly never expected the billionaire's daughter to stop directly in front of him. Charlotte smiled warmly. "Hello again, Ethan." The little girl looked between them. "You know my dad?" Charlotte nodded. "Better than he realizes." Murmurs spread across the ballroom like a rising tide. Richard Whitmore stared at the single father standing beside his daughter. A man with no fortune. No influence. No place among America's elite. And yet, for reasons no one understood, Charlotte looked at him the way people look at something priceless. In that moment, the wealthiest room in the city became completely silent. Because for the first time that night, everyone realized the story they expected was not the story they were about to witness. The silence lasted only a few seconds before the whispers began. Then the whispers became conversations. Then the conversations became laughter. Not loud laughter. Not cruel enough to be obvious. Just the kind that travels through expensive rooms when people believe they are witnessing a mistake. Ethan Carter felt every eye in the ballroom settle on him. He glanced down at his daughter. "Ava, I think there has been a misunderstanding." Ava squeezed his hand. "I do not think so, Dad." Charlotte remained standing in front of them, calm and unshaken. The confidence in her expression only seemed to confuse the crowd even more. One young investor near the front table leaned toward his friend. "That is the guy she picked?" Another shook his head. "He looks like he drove here in a truck older than I am." Across the room, several guests exchanged amused smiles. Richard Whitmore slowly stepped down from the stage. Every movement was controlled, every expression measured. He had spent decades building an empire. He knew how to handle surprises. But this was different. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There is nothing private to discuss." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I made my choice." A woman in an emerald evening gown raised an eyebrow. "You cannot be serious." Charlotte turned toward her. "I am completely serious." Ethan wished the marble floor would somehow swallow him. He was not embarrassed for himself. He was worried about Ava. Children noticed things adults ignored. He could already see the confusion in her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, "why are they looking at us like that?" Ethan knelt beside her. "Because sometimes people are surprised when something does not happen the way they expect." Ava nodded thoughtfully. "Like when our dog learned how to open the refrigerator." Ethan smiled despite everything. "Exactly like that." Charlotte laughed softly. It was a genuine laugh, warm and unguarded. For a brief moment, the tension eased. Then another voice cut through the room. "What exactly does he do?" The question came from a hedge fund manager seated near the stage. "I mean for a living." Ethan stood slowly. "I run a small renovation business." A few people exchanged glances. Someone quietly smirked. "And you thought that qualified you for this?" Ethan looked toward the speaker. His expression remained calm. "No, sir. I did not know I was applying for anything." The response caught several guests off guard. A few smiles faded. Richard noticed it too. There was no anger in Ethan's voice. No attempt to impress anyone. Just simple honesty. Charlotte folded her hands. "That is exactly why I chose him." The ballroom grew quieter. "Because he is honest?" someone asked. "Because he is real," Charlotte replied. Crystal glasses reflected the golden light from the chandeliers overhead. The orchestra had stopped playing entirely. Even the waitstaff seemed frozen in place. Richard studied Ethan carefully. The man did not look nervous anymore. He looked steady. Like someone who had spent years carrying responsibilities that mattered more than appearances. And for the first time that evening, Richard Whitmore began to wonder whether the poorest man in the room might also be the most difficult one to dismiss. The ballroom never fully recovered from the shock. Conversations continued in hushed tones long after the orchestra resumed playing. Yet Charlotte seemed completely unaffected by the judgment surrounding her. She spent the rest of the evening speaking with Ethan and Ava while the most powerful people in the room watched from a distance. Richard noticed every detail. He noticed how his daughter smiled more during those 20 minutes than she had during entire galas filled with celebrities and executives. He noticed how Ethan never tried to impress anyone. Most of all, he noticed how Ava seemed perfectly comfortable around Charlotte. A week later, curiosity led Charlotte somewhere unexpected. Instead of attending another charity luncheon or corporate event, she drove 40 miles outside the city to a quiet neighborhood lined with maple trees and modest homes. Ethan had not invited her. In fact, he had politely suggested she reconsider whatever interest she thought she had in him. But Charlotte had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Ethan was the first person who seemed determined to keep his distance. She arrived just after 7 in the morning. The autumn air was cool, and sunlight painted long golden stripes across the sidewalk. From her parked car, she saw Ethan standing on the front porch helping Ava with her backpack. "Lunch?" he asked. Ava held it up proudly. "Packed." "Homework?" "Finished." "Attitude?" Ava grinned. "Still working on that one." Ethan laughed, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Honest answer." "I respect that." Charlotte found herself smiling. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but there was something rare about it. No distractions. No assistants. No phones. Just a father giving his full attention to his daughter. After the school bus disappeared around the corner, Ethan noticed Charlotte standing beside her car. His expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is." "Fine," she replied. "I just wanted coffee." He looked at the small diner across the street. There are easier ways to get coffee. Maybe. But not better company. 20 minutes later they sat inside a booth near the window. The smell of fresh pancakes and roasted coffee filled the air. Outside, leaves drifted across the parking lot in the morning breeze. Charlotte listened as Ethan talked about renovation projects, school fundraisers, and the challenges of raising a daughter alone. He never complained. He never asked for sympathy. He simply spoke with quiet gratitude. Then the waitress approached with the check. Before Ethan could reach for it, an elderly customer near the counter accidentally dropped a small envelope. Several bills spilled onto the floor. Without hesitation, Ethan stood, helped gather the papers, and quietly slipped an extra $20 bill into the envelope when he thought nobody was watching. Charlotte noticed. The elderly man never did. Ethan returned to his seat as though nothing had happened. "You did not have to do that," Charlotte said softly. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe not." "Then why did you?" He stared out the window for a moment. "Because everybody deserves a little grace when life gets heavy." Charlotte looked at him carefully. In a world full of men trying to prove their value, Ethan Carter never seemed interested in proving anything at all. And that was precisely what made him impossible to forget. The more Charlotte learned about Ethan Carter, the less he made sense to the world she came from. In her experience, people advertised every good thing they had ever done. They framed awards on walls. They posted achievements online. They built entire reputations around generosity. Ethan did none of that. A few days after their breakfast at the diner, Charlotte found herself thinking about him during meetings, charity events, and dinners she barely remembered attending. Finally, curiosity won. One rainy Thursday afternoon, she stopped by a community center on the edge of town after hearing Ethan's name mentioned by a local volunteer. The building was old but well cared for. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the hallway. Children's artwork covered the walls in bright colors. Charlotte expected to find Ethan leading some project. Instead, she found him carrying folding chairs into a storage room. "You never mentioned this place," she said. Ethan looked surprised to see her. "It never came up." "You volunteer here?" "Sometimes." A gray-haired woman arranging books nearby laughed softly. "Sometimes?" she said. "He has been helping here for nearly 6 years." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Martha likes to exaggerate." "No," Martha replied. "I like to tell the truth." Charlotte noticed several children wave when they saw Ethan. One little boy ran over carrying a model airplane made from painted wood. "Mr. Carter, look!" Ethan immediately knelt to the child's level. "That looks fantastic, buddy." "You really think so?" "I know so." The boy grinned and ran away. Charlotte watched the interaction carefully. Nothing about it felt rehearsed. Nothing felt performative. It was simply who Ethan was when nobody important was watching. Later that afternoon, Martha invited Charlotte into a small office. Rain tapped gently against the windows while old fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "You seem interested in Ethan," Martha said. Charlotte smiled. "Is it that obvious?" Martha opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a worn folder. "He will probably hate me for this." Inside were thank you notes collected over the years. Families he had helped after house fires. Single mothers whose homes he repaired at cost. Former students he had mentored. Elderly neighbors whose roofs he fixed without charging a dime. Charlotte slowly turned the pages. There were dozens of letters. Maybe hundreds. "Why does nobody know about this?" she asked quietly. Martha looked genuinely puzzled. "Because he never tells anyone." The answer lingered in Charlotte's mind long after she left. That evening, she drove through steady rain toward the city. Street lights reflected across the windshield in long ribbons of gold. For years she had met men who possessed wealth, influence, and ambition. Yet she had never met someone who gave so much attention to people who could offer nothing in return. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Whitmore sat alone in his office overlooking the skyline. A private investigator's preliminary report rested on his desk. He had ordered it expecting problems, secrets, or reasons to protect his daughter. Instead, every page described honesty, kindness, and quiet service. Richard closed the folder and stared out at the city lights. For the first time since the gala, he felt something unfamiliar. Concern had brought him to investigate Ethan Carter. What he was beginning to feel instead was uncertainty. 3 days later, Richard Whitmore made a decision. If Ethan Carter was going to become part of his daughter's life, then he wanted to see exactly how far the man's character could stretch under pressure. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Charlotte announced that she wanted Ethan to attend a private dinner at the Whitmore estate the following Saturday evening. The invitation list was small by Whitmore standards, only a dozen guests. Yet every person at that table controlled companies, foundations, or investment portfolios worth millions. Ethan almost declined. He stood in his kitchen staring at the invitation while Ava finished homework at the table. "You should go," Ava said without looking up. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because every time you think about saying no, you get that face." "What face?" "The face that says you are scared of something." Ethan laughed softly. "I am not scared." Ava finally looked up. "Then go." Saturday arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. The Whitmore estate sat on nearly 20 acres outside the city. Long rows of oak trees lined the driveway. Fountain lights shimmered against polished stone. Ethan parked his aging pickup truck between luxury vehicles worth more than his entire renovation business. As he stepped out, several guests immediately noticed. One man glanced at the truck and quietly smirked. Another looked away as though Ethan did not belong there. Ethan had experienced moments like this before. He simply chose not to carry them. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the dining hall. Charlotte greeted him with a smile that instantly made the room feel smaller. Richard observed the interaction carefully. During dinner, conversations flowed from international markets to private equity acquisitions. Several guests intentionally directed questions toward Ethan. "What are your expansion plans?" one executive asked. "I do not really have any." "No growth strategy?" another asked. Ethan shook his head. "My goal is to do good work, take care of my employees, and be home for dinner with my daughter." A brief silence followed. Someone chuckled softly. Another guest smiled politely. The answer seemed almost absurd in a room filled with ambition. Yet Ethan remained completely comfortable with it. Later, coffee was served on the terrace overlooking the estate gardens. The evening air carried the scent of pine and fresh-cut grass. Richard finally approached Ethan alone. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." Richard folded his hands behind his back. "You realize life with Charlotte would be complicated." "Yes." "You realize people will judge you." "They already do." Richard studied him carefully. "Then why stay?" Ethan looked toward the distant lights of the city. His answer came slowly. "Because your daughter sees people for who they are. That is rare. And because I care about her." No speeches. No promises. No attempts to impress. Just simple truth. Richard expected ambition. He expected calculation. He expected someone chasing opportunity. Instead, he found a man who seemed interested only in honesty. As the conversation ended, Richard watched Ethan walk across the terrace toward Charlotte. And for the first time, the billionaire began to worry that the man he had hoped to disqualify might actually be the one person in the room his daughter had chosen wisely. The following week, Richard Whitmore decided to stop observing and start testing. The investigation had failed to uncover flaws. The private reports had only deepened the mystery. Every person interviewed described Ethan Carter with the same words: honest, dependable, kind. Richard had spent a lifetime believing that every man had a price. The only question was how much. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, his assistant called Ethan and requested a private meeting. No explanation was given. Ethan arrived at Whitmore Global headquarters shortly after 3 o'clock. The building towered above downtown like a monument to ambition. Glass walls reflected the cloudy sky. Employees moved through the lobby with quiet urgency. Ethan felt slightly out of place, but not intimidated. He had spent too many years solving real problems to be impressed by polished marble. Richard was waiting in a private conference room on the 48th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked miles of city streets below. "Thank you for coming," Richard said. "Of course." Ethan sat across from him. A few moments passed. Then Richard slid a large envelope across the table. Ethan looked at it but did not touch it. "What is this?" "An opportunity." Ethan remained silent. Richard continued. "Inside is a certified check for $10 million. The room became very still. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the skyline. $10 million? Ethan asked. "Yes." "Why?" Richard folded his hands. "Because I would like you to walk away from Charlotte." Ethan stared at him. No anger. No outrage. Just quiet disbelief. "You are serious?" "Completely." Richard's voice remained calm. "You could expand your business. Secure Ava's future. Eliminate every financial concern you will ever face." Ethan looked toward the window. For a long moment neither man spoke. The city hummed far below them. Finally Ethan asked, "Does Charlotte know about this?" "No." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then she never should." Richard watched carefully. "You are not even going to look at the check?" Ethan pushed the envelope back across the table. "I do not need to. Most people would. I am not most people." Richard leaned back. "You are turning down $10 million. Ethan smiled faintly. "No. I am protecting something worth more." The answer landed harder than Richard expected. "And what is that?" Ethan's voice softened. "Self-respect." Silence filled the conference room. Richard had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions. He had watched powerful executives fight over contracts. Yet this simple conversation unsettled him more than any boardroom battle ever had. Ethan stood. "Charlotte is not a transaction," Richard said. "Nothing. And if she decides she does not want me in her life, I will respect that decision. But it will be her decision. Not mine. Not yours." He turned toward the door. "Mr. Whitmore," Richard called. Ethan paused. "Yes?" The billionaire searched for words and found none. For the first time in decades, money had completely failed him. Ethan gave a small nod and left the room. Minutes later, Richard remained alone at the conference table. The unopened envelope sat exactly where Ethan had pushed it. $10 million. Untouched. Outside the window, the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the city. And for the first time, Richard Whitmore felt a quiet and deeply uncomfortable realization. The man he had tried to buy was beginning to earn something far more valuable than his approval. He was earning his respect. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, speculation filled business circles, charity boards, and social events across the city. Some people called Charlotte reckless. Others called her brave. A few simply waited to see how the story would end. Richard Whitmore finally made an announcement. A formal gala would be held at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. The event would celebrate the foundation's anniversary, but everyone understood the real purpose. Charlotte would make her final decision publicly. The ballroom was larger than the one from the first gala. Television cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled designated media sections. Business leaders, philanthropists, and public figures occupied hundreds of seats beneath towering crystal chandeliers. The atmosphere felt less like a celebration and more like a moment of history waiting to happen. Backstage, Charlotte stood quietly near a dressing room window overlooking the city. The lights below stretched for miles into the darkness. Richard entered the room. For a moment neither spoke. Then he offered a small smile. "You still have time to change your mind." Charlotte looked at her father. "Do you want me to?" Richard considered the question carefully. Weeks earlier his answer would have been immediate. Now it was complicated. "I want you to be." Happy. Charlotte's eyes softened. I am. Across town, Ethan adjusted the collar of his jacket while Ava sat beside him in the pickup truck. The city lights reflected across the windshield. Nervous? Ava asked. Ethan laughed quietly. A little. Good. Good? It means you care. Ethan shook his head. You are getting too wise for a 10-year-old. Ava grinned. I learned from you. When they arrived at the hotel, cameras immediately turned toward them. Flashbulbs lit the entrance. Ethan instinctively moved closer to Ava. He had never enjoyed attention. Yet throughout the evening he remained calm. Inside the ballroom, guests watched him with curiosity. Some still questioned whether he belonged there. Others had begun to admire him. Many simply wanted answers. The evening progressed through speeches and presentations. Finally, Richard stepped onto the stage. The room gradually fell silent. Thank you all for being here, he said. Tonight is about many things. Family, legacy, character, and choices. He paused. Most importantly, it is about allowing people the freedom to choose their own future. A murmur moved through the crowd. Charlotte walked onto the stage beside him. Elegant and confident, she seemed completely at peace. Richard handed her the microphone. The decision is yours, he said. The ballroom became still. Charlotte looked across the audience. Wealthy executives. Influential families. Powerful investors. Faces filled with anticipation. Then her eyes found Ethan. He stood near the back beside Ava, looking as uncomfortable as ever with being the center of attention. Charlotte smiled. My choice has never changed. She stepped down from the stage. The sound of her heels echoed softly across the polished floor. Every camera followed her. Every guest held their breath. She passed row after row of distinguished guests without hesitation. Then she stopped directly in front of Ethan Carter. And as the room watched in complete silence, she reached for his hand. For a moment, nobody moved. Charlotte stood beside Ethan, her hand resting gently in his. Camera flashes flickered across the ballroom, but even the photographers seemed uncertain whether to keep shooting. The silence felt different now. It was no longer disbelief. It was anticipation. Richard Whitmore remained near the stage, watching carefully. Then something unexpected happened. Ava stepped forward. Excuse me, she said softly. Her small voice somehow carried through the enormous room. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Ethan looked surprised. Ava? She smiled nervously. There is something I want to share. Charlotte squeezed Ethan's hand. Let her. Ava reached into her small purse and removed a folded envelope. The paper was worn from being opened many times over the years. Ethan immediately recognized it. His expression changed. Sweetheart, you do not have to. Ava nodded. I know. But I want to. The ballroom grew still again. Even the musicians had lowered their instruments. Ava carefully unfolded the letter. My mom wrote this before she passed away, she said. Dad keeps it in a special box at home. A few guests exchanged glances. Richard listened intently. Ava began reading. If you are reading this one day, it means life has continued without me. Ethan, I know you will try to carry everything by yourself. You always do. But I hope you remember something important. The greatest measure of a person is not what they own. It is how they treat people when nobody is watching. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Ava continued. One day our daughter will learn from your example. She will see your kindness. She will see your character. And I hope she never forgets that real wealth is found in generosity, grace, and love. Ethan lowered his eyes. Charlotte felt tears gathering despite her efforts to remain composed. Ava's voice remained steady. You may never become the richest man in the room. But if you stay the man you are today, you will always be the richest man where it matters most. The final words lingered in the air long after Ava stopped reading. No one spoke. Several guests quietly wiped their eyes. Others stared at Ethan with entirely new understanding. The letter had revealed something no financial statement ever could. It explained why he lived the way he did. Why he gave without expecting anything back. Why he carried himself with such quiet dignity. Charlotte looked at him and smiled through tears. Richard slowly sat down in the nearest chair. The billionaire had spent years studying leadership, success, and influence. Yet a simple letter written years earlier had taught him more about character than many of the people he had built companies with. Across the ballroom, a standing ovation began. Not loud at first. Just a few people rising from their seats. Then more followed. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Ethan looked overwhelmed. Ava slipped her hand into his. Charlotte stood beside them. And as the entire room rose in respect, Richard Whitmore realized that nobody was applauding a businessman, a celebrity, or a powerful figure. They were honoring something far rarer. They were honoring a good man. The applause continued for nearly a minute before gradually fading into a quiet that felt deeper than silence itself. Ethan stood beside Ava and Charlotte, unsure what to do with the attention. Recognition had never been something he chased. For most of his life, he had found comfort in ordinary days, in early mornings, school lunches, home repairs, and the simple responsibility of caring for the people he loved. Yet somehow those ordinary choices had brought him here. Richard Whitmore slowly rose from his chair. Every eye in the ballroom followed him. The billionaire walked across the polished floor without speaking. No assistants followed. No cameras were invited closer. It was simply one man approaching another. Ethan straightened respectfully. Richard stopped in front of him. For a brief moment neither spoke. Then Richard extended his hand. The gesture was simple, but everyone in the room understood its meaning. Ethan accepted it. "I owe you an apology," Richard said quietly. The ballroom became completely still. "I spent months trying to understand why my daughter chose you." Richard glanced toward Charlotte before returning his attention to Ethan. "The truth is, I was asking the wrong question." Ethan remained silent. Richard continued. "The question should have been why I did not see what you saw from the beginning." A few guests lowered their eyes. Others listened carefully. "I measured success by numbers," Richard said. "By buildings, companies, and accounts. Those things matter. But they are not everything." He looked toward Ava. "You reminded me of that." Ava smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir." A faint laugh moved through the room. Richard smiled for the first time that evening without reservation. Then he turned toward Charlotte. "You chose a man of character." His voice softened. "And I am proud of your decision." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. She stepped forward and embraced her father. The ballroom erupted into gentle applause once again. This time it felt different. Not celebration. Acceptance. Later that evening, guests slowly began leaving the hotel. Outside, the city glowed beneath a clear autumn sky. The air was cool and carried the scent of distant rain. Ethan, Charlotte, and Ava stood together near the entrance. For the first time in months, there were no reporters surrounding them, no expectations hanging over them, no tests left to pass. Just a quiet moment beneath the lights. "So," Ava said, looking up at Charlotte, "does this mean you are sticking around?" Charlotte laughed softly. "If your father will have me." Ava looked at Ethan. "Well?" Ethan smiled. "I think that can be arranged." Ava nodded approvingly. "Good. I was hoping for that answer." They stood together for a moment, watching traffic move through the streets below. The future remained unwritten. There would be challenges ahead. Different worlds do not blend overnight. But some things are stronger than doubt. Some things are stronger than wealth, status, or expectations. And as the city lights stretched across the horizon, Richard Whitmore watched from a nearby window. He saw his daughter smiling. He saw Ava laughing. He saw Ethan standing quietly beside them. Then he saw something money had never been able to buy. Peace. The room had fallen silent because a billionaire's daughter chose a poor single father. But in the end, the silence remained for a different reason entirely. Everyone had witnessed the same truth. Real wealth was never about what a person possessed. It was about the kindness they carried, the dignity they protected, and the lives they lifted along the way.